Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in Judges. We're going to be starting chapter 18 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we start in chapter 18, verses 1 through 31 deal with idolatry in the tribe of Dan. Idolatry now comes to the tribe of Dan because of what we saw in our previous lessons in chapter 17 with Micah and his mother. Now, Israel should have had God as their king. They should have desired to live by God's word. But instead, like all people who do not want God to rule their lives, they lived their lives as they desired. God was rejected to be their king, and there was no man as king, as their king to guide them in the ways of God. Therefore, they were open in their hearts to worship whatever God fit their pleasure. As we saw back in Judges chapter 1 and verse 34, the Danites were forced by the Amorites into the mountains. There was not enough room for them in the mountains, and the Amorites would not let them come down and settle in the plains. So a number of the Danites decided to look for a piece of land that they could live and grow in. But it was not God's will for them to seek for another land. God's original will for the Danites was the land that they were given. Their original territory was west of Benjamin and between Judah to the south and Ephraim to the north. They were given a nice place in the promised land, but they could not drive out the Amorites. They should have trusted God and asked him for help, or at least asked help from Judah and Ephraim to drive out these Amorites. Instead, they go against God's chosen land for them, and they covet other people's lands. The Danites will completely destroy a whole city and an area of people, all because they were not satisfied with their own land and they wanted more room to grow. You know, when people are dissatisfied with their portion in this life, then they will seek to take that which is not theirs, and people will be hurt or even killed. As Christians, we need to be satisfied. Listen, be satisfied with what you have been given from God. Don't envy or lust after what other people have. Let's turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. And it says here, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw. What? I saw that it was from the hand of God. Now chapter 3 and verse 13, and it says here, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. Listen, be satisfied with what God has given to you. God will give you more if he wants you to have more. And maybe he doesn't. Maybe he sees that you having more is a bad thing. Pray, seek God. But be satisfied with what you have, because if you start lusting and envying after what other people have, it only hurts other people. And when nations get involved doing it, we're talking about people being killed for what other nations have. Of all the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Dan has the most darkest history. The tribe of Dan seems to have been cut off from the rest of the tribes, probably because they turned to idolatry and affected the other tribes with their idolatry. In Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 through 8, the tribe of Dan is not represented with having 12,000 men sealed during the tribulation period. They're not mentioned at all. And because of this, we cannot say for sure that Dan's name will be on one of the gates of the New Jerusalem. Again, it doesn't say, God doesn't name, he just says there's 12 gates in the city of Jerusalem, around the New Jerusalem, in heaven when we get to go there. But there's no guarantee that Dan's name's going to be on one. In Ezekiel chapter 48, verses 1 and 2 and verse 32, Ezekiel's vision of the city includes a gate for Dan on the east side. But this seems to be the only bright spot for the tribe of Dan. Dan's omission from the rest of the tribes of Israel continues in the book of 1 Chronicles. I never realized this until I started studying here in Judges. I never realized this. But in 1 Chronicles, where in the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles, where you get all the descendants of all the different tribes, the genealogy of Dan is not given. No one is mentioned from the tribe of Dan. In fact, in 1 Chronicles chapters 1 through 9, only there are 2 Levitical cities that belong in Dan's territory, the original territory of Dan. But the writer of 1 Chronicles does not say that those 2 cities belong to Dan's tribe. It's almost like he's giving us the feeling that the writer of Dan did not want to even mention Dan's name at all. That's interesting. I didn't realize that. But Dan's name is not meant. None of the descendants of Dan are mentioned at all in 1 Chronicles chapters 1 through 9. It's interesting. Even the birth of Dan came about because of jealousy. Rachel wanted children, but couldn't bear any. So she envied her sister Leah. Her strong desire to be a mother caused her to do the same thing that Sarah did with Abraham. And because of it, Ishmael was born. Dan was one of Jacob's wife's maid, Bilhah. I think it was from Bilhah, maybe the other one. I forget the name of the other maid that Jacob had with one of his wives. A child born Ishmael was born from a bondwoman. So also was Dan. Dan was born from a bondwoman. As Ishmael's descendants have been a problem down through history, so also Dan's descendants have been a problem to the rest of the tribes. It's interesting. Yes. Dan's descendants, the tribe of Dan, was a problem to the rest of the tribes of Israel because of their idolatry and spreading idolatry. I'm not saying that they went and promoted it, but they began idolatry in the nation of Israel, in the children of Israel, and it began to spread because of Dan. It seems that the beginning of all of Dan's troubles began here in Judges chapter 18. At the very beginning of Israel becoming established in the promised land, the Danites choose to have idolatry established in their land. This is why it was easy for Jeroboam, who was King Jeroboam, who was the first king of the northern tribes of Israel. It was easy for him to set up one of the golden calves in Dan's land. And we see that in 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 25 to 30. The children of Dan were the first to introduce idolatry in their land. And Judges chapter 18 tells us how it happened. So when we study Judges chapter 18, you're going to see a description of how Dan began to be idol worshipers. Now, let's read verse 1. And it says here, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites sought them inheritance to dwell in, for unto that day all the inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. Now, according to Numbers chapter 26, at the very last census that was taken in the wilderness by Moses, the Danites numbered 64,400 males, 400 men, which made them one of the largest tribes. But they were given the smallest portion of land in Canaan. They would have had plenty of room to spread out and to grow, but they could not drive out the Amorites. And it seems that they didn't ask for help. The Amorites pushed the Danites to build houses and to live on the side of mountains and on the tops of mountains. But this was not enough room. I mean, basically, the Amorites were pushing them around. And yet the Danites had plenty of people to kick them out. And they had God on their side. Therefore, the Danites, or at least a portion of the Danites, decided to look for a different piece of land, possibly still within the promised land of Israel. Now, verse 2 says, and the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men from their coasts, men of valor, from Zoar and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, go, search the land, who, when they came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they lodged there. Now, 5 brave men were chosen from all the families of Dan to go and to spy out a land for them to dwell in. As I said, not all of the Danites moved north into this new land. Why? How do we know that? Because in Judges chapter 13 and verse 2, we see that Samson's family was from Zoar. From Zorah. And it's the same place that these men were chosen from to go up to look for the new land. So there still were some Danites that didn't move north. They stayed in the promise. They stayed in their portion of the promised land. Verse 3 tells us that these men did not actually, they didn't actually lodge with Micah, but they lodged somewhere near him. It seems like Micah had a plot of land with many houses on it, and they stayed in one of those houses. Now, verse 3 says, when they were by the house, when they were by the house of Micah, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned in thither. And they said unto him, Who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here? Now we begin to see how one man's sin can affect many people. Micah probably had several houses on his property, one of which the five spies stayed in. They get ready to leave on their journey, and they hear this man's voice. They must have had personal knowledge of the Levite because, listen, because they don't ask him where he came from. They must have already known where he was from. It is possible that the Levite was performing some kind of services to the idols. So he was in his robe doing service to the idols, and probably his voice goes out into the street or out into the land, and these five men, they hear his voice and they know him. They know him. And they know where he's from too, because they didn't ask him where he was from. Verse 4 says, And he said unto them, Thus and thus deals Micah with me, and has hired me, and I am his priest. You know, it almost seems like the Levite knew them, because he basically tells them everything. Now, how many of us would tell everything about our lives to people that we really didn't know? I mean, it's not normal for you to spill out everything about your life to somebody you don't know. So more than likely, this Jonathan, the Levite, knew these people. So far in this story, Micah had set himself up really nice. He had his own worship center with his own gods, and he had his own hired priest. All this may sound terrible, but Micah isn't really much different than people today. You may say this is really bad. I mean, what Micah did, he had his a house of idols, and he's got this priest. I mean, this is really bad. But there's people today just like Micah. As it was with Micah, people feel that they can stay at home and worship God. They can read the Bible and they can say their prayers all at home. All the visible gods that Micah had are no different than the cars, the trucks, the homes, the stores, the TV that people look at every Sunday instead of going to church. And people who worship from home can get out of bed and worship God anytime they want. Oh yeah. They can have their worship service anytime they want. They can stay right home. That's what Micah did. He had his worship center right at his house. Oh, very convenient. And many people today have a convenient Christianity. Like Micah, they forget the unseen world. And they soon put all their attention on the idols that they have at home. Yes, Micah's religious worship, like many people's today, was somewhat cheap and convenient. Yep, it really was. Verse 5 says, And they said unto him, Ask counsel, we pray you, of God, that we may know whether our way which we go shall be prosperous. Now, the depravity of the children of Israel had fallen in the depravity that they had fallen into is seen in that these five men, they neither rebuke the Levite for taking on a priestly position, which was only for the sons of Aaron, nor do they rebuke him for worshiping idols. Remember, he's a Levite. He's not supposed to be a priest. Priests were only to be descendants of Aaron. He is not a descendant of Aaron. The priesthood in Israel was only to be descendants of Aaron. He was he was a descendant of Moses, not of Aaron. So he was not supposed to be a priest. Did anybody check him? No, nobody checked him. He just did it. Instead, they take advantage of this opportunity to get counsel from God. But this Levite is a false priest, and unless God overrules him, he can only give false counsel in God's name. You know, many people today look for counsel from God, but they are asking people who are not equipped to give that counsel. And maybe it's because they ask people who will tell them what they want to hear. Maybe that's the reason why. Maybe they don't want to know God's true will for them. Maybe they want somebody that'll tell them what they want to hear. So we're going to continue on in verse 6 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.